I noticed the first tire marks one morning while I was drinking my coffee on the back porch. The soil was still damp from the early spring rain, and the muddy grooves cut a wide path straight through the side of my property. At first, I thought maybe a neighbor had made a wrong turn. It wouldn't be the first time. My house sat at the edge of the neighborhood where the HOA properties ended and my private 5-acre parcel began. But the next morning, there were more tracks. Deeper, heavier, widening. On the third day I saw it. A massive yellow dump truck coated in dried red clay rattled its way right across the corner of my land like it belonged there. No hesitation, no caution. Just barreling through the overgrown easement that hadn't been in use since the 1980s. I stood up so fast I knocked over my coffee. My golden retriever Duke barked once and took off toward the fence line. I followed, grabbing my phone on the way. The truck driver didn't even glance over as he passed by. The sheer audacity of it stunned me. That was my land, not HOA common space, not a public road, private titled, surveyed. My name on every inch of it recorded at the county office. And yet here was some random contractor chewing up my grass and tearing past my garden beds. I took photos, lots of them. The next truck came 10 minutes later. This one carried pallets of cinder blocks stacked like a fortress. I waved both arms, trying to flag him down. He honked, not in greeting but in warning, and didn't stop. That night, I walked the perimeter flashlight in hand and found a mess. Ruts half a foot deep. Tire tracks missing my water barrel by inches. A snapped irrigation line I had buried myself last summer. This wasn't just rude, it was destruction. I wasn't part of the HOA. Never had been. When I bought this property 7 years ago, after retiring from civil engineering, I made sure of it. I wanted peace. I wanted distance. I wanted to build a quiet life after the accident that nearly took my leg and the woman I loved. She passed before we could see this land flourish, but I stayed. This place became sacred. I spent the next morning making phone calls. The city said it was private land, not their issue. The county told me to document everything and speak to an attorney. I called the HOA office directly, even though I wasn't a member. That's when I heard her voice for the first time. Hello, this is Karen Myers, president of the Lakeside Oaks Homeowners Association. How may I help you? I explained the situation calmly at first, about the trucks cutting through my land, about the damage, about the lack of permission. There was a pause, then that thin dismissive chuckle. Oh, that strip? That's just an old construction path. It's been there for years. We assumed it was still unclaimed. The contractor is just trying to save time getting materials to phase 3. Unclaimed, I repeated, incredulous. That's my land. I have the deed. And your trucks are trespassing. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, she said, sweet as poison. We'll have someone look into it. In the meantime, please be neighborly. Be neighborly. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood. That evening, I set up motion sensor trail cameras along the tree line. The kind I used to use for spotting deer. I repositioned one toward the edge of the easement just inside my property line, and another pointed back toward the HOA's construction staging area. I added a third near the garden beds, where the soil had been flattened by tons of truck weight. Over the next week, the footage piled up like evidence at a crime scene. 7 different trucks, multiple passes a day. No effort to avoid my garden or infrastructure. One driver even tossed a fast food bag out the window right onto my raspberry patch. I compiled the videos and photos into a shared folder and sent them to the HOA marked Formal Notice of Trespass and Property Damage. Their response, a single sentence, the board will review this at our next monthly meeting. That was 3 weeks away. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I pulled my old surveying equipment from the shed. It was dusty, but still solid. I had used that tripod and transit for most of my working life, back when I was running site evaluations for highway expansions and floodplain projects. It felt like an extension of myself even after all these years. I set new markers along my property line, not makeshift wooden stakes, but powder-coated steel pins sunk 2 feet into the soil. I flagged each one bright orange. I wasn't going to let them say they didn't know. Then I posted signs, private property, no trespassing, cameras in use. Still, the trucks kept coming. The drivers never looked. They followed the same worn trail like cattle conditioned by routine. My blood pressure climbed each time I heard the rumble of engines. On a Sunday morning, one of the few I actually tried to sleep in, I woke to a crunch. A metallic crunch. Not on my land this time, but in my soul. They'd clipped one of the garden arches, bent the wrought iron, snapped the rosemary bush beneath it. That arch had been a gift from my wife, custom welded. I stood there staring at the wreckage, and something in me cracked. They weren't going to stop. Not with warnings, not with notices, not with signs. If I wanted them to stop, I had to make them. And so I began sketching. Late that night, with floodlights on and blueprints spread across my kitchen table, I pulled out every piece of knowledge I had left from my years in engineering. If they wanted to treat my land like a road fine, I'd give them a roadblock they wouldn't forget. 2 days after I sent the formal notice, a white SUV pulled up to the edge of my driveway. I watched through the front window, arms crossed, as the woman stepped out, heels sinking into the gravel, like she'd never stood on raw ground in her life. Karen Myers. I knew it was her before she even knocked. She had that look. The kind of controlled confidence that comes from years of bossing people around without ever getting dirty. Blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, clipboard in hand, HOA badge dangling around her neck like a sheriff's star. The badge didn't mean anything to me. I wasn't in her kingdom. I opened the door, not bothering to hide my annoyance. "Mr. Garrett?" she asked, a smile stretched too tight across her face. "That's me." I thought it might be helpful if we spoke face to face. I understand there's been some concern about the trucks accessing Phase 3 construction. Concern, I asked. That's a delicate way of describing trespassing and property damage. She let out a small laugh, the kind that made my molars grind. Well, we certainly don't want to ruffle feathers. But to be fair, our contractor's been using that route for weeks without complaint, because I didn't know they were using it until my garden was flattened. She glanced over my shoulder, as if hoping to see a weed patch that proved her right. But instead, her gaze met the clean lines of my property markers, bright orange flags waving like battle standards. While she continued tapping her clipboard, our understanding is that the path they're using was originally intended as a utility easement. It's common to use those during development, especially when the main access point is under improvement review. And your understanding is incorrect, I said. That path was abandoned decades ago. I have the updated parcel maps and title deeds to prove it. It's my land. She pursed her lips. Even if that's the case, this shortcut is temporary. It'll only be a few more weeks. Would you be willing to show some neighborly flexibility? I stared at her for a long moment. You mean let you keep destroying my land for free? Her face twitched. I'm sorry, Mr. Garrett, but with the volume of materials being delivered each day, rerouting would cause significant delays. The HOA is under pressure to complete Phase 3 by June, and I'm under no obligation to make your life easier. The smile faded. If this escalates to legal action, she said slowly, it could cost you more than it's worth. There it was, the real Karen. She didn't want a solution. She wanted submission. I leaned forward slightly. Let me be clear. If one more tire touches my soil, I'll take it up with the sheriff, the county zoning board, and my attorney. You don't have a leg to stand on. Her eyes narrowed. We'll see. She turned on her heel, marched back to her SUV, and peeled off in a spray of dust. Duke let out a growl from the porch. Same, I muttered. That afternoon, I drove to the county clerk's office and got certified copies of my land deed and parcel map. I highlighted the boundaries and added notations referencing the easement termination date from 1984, ironclad. I made copies for the sheriff's department, my personal records, and even one for the local code enforcement office. Then I started calling neighbors. The ones on the fringe like me. The ones the HOA didn't invite to block parties or include in newsletters. The ones who'd had their mailboxes moved without notice or gotten violation slips for paint that wasn't neighborhood neutral. Turns out I wasn't the only one fed up. There was Mary, a retired teacher who'd had her hydrangeas ripped out by an overzealous landscaper because they weren't approved plantings. And Brian, a Navy vet, whose RV had been towed for ruining the aesthetic when it was parked on his own gravel pad out of view. Together we started documenting everything. Drone footage, timestamps, plate numbers, driver IDs. Mary's grandson built us a shared Google Drive folder titled Operation Gatekeeper. Meanwhile, the trucks kept coming. They tore deeper trenches into the grass, despite the rain. The edge of my driveway was beginning to crack from the pressure of the heavy axles brushing past it daily. One morning I stepped outside to find a broken PVC pipe jutting from the soil. Like a snapped bone, one of my sprinkler lines had been severed. Still, I kept calm. That was the part that probably drove them most insane. I never screamed, never cursed. I just gathered facts, lined up evidence, and smiled while they made mistake after mistake. Then came the notice. A folded paper slipped into my mailbox without postage. HOA letterhead. A courtesy reminder that I was obligated to maintain aesthetic harmony with the community, and that unauthorized construction or obstruction may be subject to code review. They knew I was planning something. They just didn't know what. Because by then I had started work on the gate. I didn't post about it, didn't tell Mary or Brian or anyone else. I drew up plans by hand, calculated the angle of approach, and sourced my materials from a steel fabricator 2 towns over. Every bolt, every hinge, every concrete footing would be to code. I even filed an official notification with the county just to have it on record. The gate wouldn't block their trucks directly. It would just be in their way, right at the line where my land began and theirs didn't. I poured the footings at night, welded the frame on weekends, installed motion-triggered lights and weather-sealed cameras. It wasn't just a structure, it was a message. You're not welcome here. But I wasn't done. I added one more touch, a sensor strip just inside the property line, calibrated to log each vehicle that passed through. Each violation time-stamped and stored. I was building a case they wouldn't see coming. And every time I heard a truck roll by, I smiled not with rage but with certainty. Because this time I wasn't just defending my land. I was defending the principle that no one, not even a clipboard-wielding Karen with a committee title, had the right to trample over someone else's life without consequence. It happened on a Tuesday morning just after dawn, the one time of day I felt completely at peace. The sky was still laced with the soft lavender hues of early spring, and the dew had yet to burn off the leaves. Duke had just finished his patrol around the garden, sniffing every fence post, as if his nose could detect betrayal. I was crouched beside the tomato vines, thinning out the lower growth, lost in the quiet rhythm of tending to something that only asked for patience and light. That garden meant more to me than I'd ever admitted out loud. I built it in the second year, after Amanda passed. We were going to do it together. Raised beds, heirloom seeds, compost from the chickens she wanted to raise. After the accident took her, I let everything fall apart for a while, including myself. But one day I found the old envelope of her seed packets in the junk drawer next to the garage keys. I sat down in the dirt that spring and wept until the sun went down. Then I planted. Year by year, bed by bed, I rebuilt that patch of earth into something that reminded me of who we had once been. Carrots, squash, basil, and sweet corn. But the tomatoes were hers, Cherokee purples. She used to slice them and sprinkle them with sea salt, humming to herself at the sink. I had just stood up, knees creaking, when I felt it. A tremble beneath my boots. Then the roar. Too close, too fast. I turned just in time to see the front end of a flatbed truck lurch off the worn shortcut path straight into the edge of my garden. It didn't even stop. 6 tons of steel on rubber tires churned through the outer bed, snapping trellises like matchsticks. The tires spun in the soft soil, flinging clumps of earth into the air. My fencing bent and collapsed under the weight, and the front end of the truck skidded sideways before the driver finally jammed on the brakes, halting inches from my compost bins. I was frozen. My hands were fists before I realized it. The driver, a young guy maybe in his 20s, jumped down from the cab and looked around like he'd just stepped on a crack in the sidewalk. His hard hat was tilted back, and he didn't even apologize. Just muttered something about soft ground and bad directions. I stepped forward slowly, deliberately. "You just destroyed 3 garden beds," I said, voice low. He shrugged. "It's not my fault. We were told this was the staging route." "Told by who?" He hesitated. "HOA lady, Karen or something." "Of course." I looked down at the carnage. One of the tomato vines, Amanda's, had been yanked from the soil roots, dangling in the air like veins torn from flesh. I knelt and cradled it in my palm. The stem was still warm from the sun. "You're trespassing," I said louder this time. "This is private property." The driver scoffed. "Take it up with the HOA, man. I'm just doing my job." He climbed back into the truck and reversed out his tires, leaving twin scars of churned mud and broken dreams behind him. I didn't move until the rumble of the engine disappeared down the road. Then I walked inside, washed the dirt off my hands, and sat at the table. And I broke. I don't mean a single tear. I mean shoulders-shaking, gut-racking sobs, the kind you hope no one ever sees. Because this wasn't just about plants, or boundaries, or even trespassing. It was about grief. About watching something you loved be destroyed again, by people who didn't care, didn't ask, and didn't think they had to. I sat there for what felt like an hour. Then I stood up and opened the cabinet where I kept Amanda's seed packets. I took out the last envelope of Cherokee purples and placed it gently on the counter. It was the only one left. I would save it. I wouldn't waste it on soil they had touched. Instead, I grabbed my phone and opened the folder. Operation Gatekeeper. I added the date, time, and video footage from the camera that caught the entire incident in high definition. You could see the driver's face, his license plate, the exact path the truck took off the marked route and into my garden. Then I did something I hadn't done yet. I emailed the footage to the HOA board's general email. Subject: Trespass plus property destruction equal legal action. I didn't include a message body. The video spoke for itself. Within an hour, I received a reply from Karen. Mr. Garrett, we regret the unfortunate misunderstanding this morning. The board has reviewed your concerns and will remind our contractors to remain within appropriate limits. Please understand this is a high-priority development for our community, and delays affect all of us. Best, Karen Myers, HOA President, Lakeside Oaks. Misunderstanding. That word again. That smug, smiling mask they always wore before sliding the knife in deeper. I stared at her email and shook my head. No apology. No offer of compensation. Not even acknowledgement that they were on my land. This wasn't incompetence anymore. This was arrogance. Worse, it was weaponized indifference. They had no intention of stopping, not unless I forced them or to. So that evening, I went out to the garage and started taking inventory. Steel tubing, post hole digger, cement mix, hinges, anchoring bolts, wire mesh. An old keypad motor I hadn't used since we installed security gates at the old factory. By midnight, I had blueprints sketched across 2 sawhorses. If they wanted to bulldoze their way through life, I was going to make sure they found out what happened when the wall finally pushed back. Because they didn't just roll over my tomatoes. They rolled over Amanda. And I was done watching them do it. The next morning, I mailed certified letters. Not emails, not text messages, not friendly, neighborly visits. No, those were behind me now. I went full paper trail, stamped, tracked, signed for receipts. One to the HOA board, one to Karen Myers specifically, one to the contractor listed on the city's development registry, and one to the county recorder's office just so they couldn't claim ignorance later. Each envelope included 3 things. 1, a notice of trespass, citing property code. 2, a demand for cessation of all vehicular traffic across my land, effective immediately. 3, a printed screenshot of the truck in my garden, time-stamped and GPS tagged from my camera system. I had Duke sit next to me while I stapled the package shut. He looked as serious as I felt. But I didn't stop there. I uploaded the same documents to an online portal I'd used years ago when working with municipal engineers. It was a quiet little system most people never touched, but every notice uploaded there gets time-stamped and archived for public record, just in case. By the end of the week, I had not only built my gate, but built a case. The gate was coming together slowly but beautifully. I'd anchored 2 steel beams in 4 feet of concrete. Over the weekend, I installed the motor housing and ran wiring underground to a solar panel on the shed. I fabricated the gate face from powder-coated aluminum with a custom-welded central brace shaped like a V, not for victory, but for vindication. Still the trucks came. Still they passed. Still they crushed. Only now they did it with cameras catching every tread mark. Then on Monday it arrived. A letter. Certified. From a law firm I recognized from my years in the city. Dunstan, Blake & Rios. Big HOA representation. They didn't deal in speed bumps and pool pass rules. They were the kind who threatened elderly neighbors over fence heights and spent thousands making sure your shed door wasn't the wrong shade of beige. I opened the envelope carefully, even though I already knew what was inside. Mr. Garrett. We represent the Lakeside Oaks Homeowners Association. This correspondence serves as formal notification that your recent modifications and obstruction of what is historically and operationally considered a utility easement may constitute an encumbrance on HOA development rights and are currently under review. You are advised to cease further construction and remove any structures obstructing HOA vehicle access until this matter is clarified in mediation. Failure to comply may result in legal action to compel compliance and recover damages. They were bluffing. There was no active easement, none registered with the county, none referenced on any updated deed. I knew because I had pulled every plat map, boundary survey, and right-of-way document from the last 50 years. I even had the original termination letter for the easement dated 1984, signed by the city engineer, digitized and notarized. Still seeing it in black and white, the nerve of them made my stomach twist. I poured myself a bourbon and sat on the porch. Across the way, another truck crawled over the shortcut path like it had been blessed by God and HOA decree. The driver glanced toward my house, but didn't stop. Not yet. He didn't know what I had planned. The gate was ready. All that remained was the final installation, welding the pivot frame, and installing the keypad lock. That would happen tomorrow. I had already taken a personal vow after that gate was up, not one vehicle would pass through my land again. Let them sue. Let them send more letters. Hell, let Karen herself show up in a ball gown with a peace offering, it wouldn't matter. I was done being polite. That night, I typed up a formal rebuttal to the HOA's legal threat. I cited California Civil Code 48401, right to exclude, trespass tort, precedent, Smith v. Jones, 1997. Photographic and video evidence from 14 days of repeated documented incursions. A signed affidavit from my neighbor Brian, who had witnessed multiple trucks ignore my posted signage. I copied the entire board, the city clerk, and for good measure, a local journalist friend of Amanda's who now worked on zoning abuse cases. I didn't send the email right away. I waited because I knew what was coming. And it came the next morning at 8:37 a.m. I was in the garage tightening the final bolts on the gate motor when I heard the sound of shifting gravel and diesel rumble, but slower than usual. I stepped outside just in time to see a full-size cement truck hesitating at the edge of the shortcut. It stopped. For the first time in weeks, a truck stopped. The driver leaned out the window confused. His GPS told him to continue straight through my property, but something was different now. The new gate stood tall and unapologetic glossy black in the morning sun, flanked by no trespassing signs in bold red font and 2 HD cameras fixed like sniper scopes on the drive. He reached for his radio, waited, then reversed. I smiled. The gate hadn't even been activated yet. 10 minutes later, another truck came. This one didn't stop. It barreled forward, determined to push through, assuming like everyone else had, that I was just another pushover who wouldn't dare stand up to the mighty HOA. I watched from the shed window as 15 tons of cement and steel rammed headfirst into my gate. The sound was satisfying. The impact crumpled the front fender and shattered the left headlight. My gate. It didn't move an inch. The truck's bumper was no match for 4 feet of reinforced concrete and tempered alloy steel. The driver threw open his door furious, gesturing wildly toward the gate, as if it had personally insulted him. That's when Karen showed up. Her Lexus SUV pulled up beside the truck brake lights glowing red with outrage. She stepped out in a designer blazer phone already pressed to her ear. And then she saw the sign. Private property, under video surveillance, access denied. Her eyes found the camera, then darted to me, standing in full view holding the remote control for the gate like it was a trophy. I waved. She screamed something I couldn't hear it, but it didn't matter. Because in that moment, she knew. The legal letters, the veiled threats, the smug deflections, they didn't work here. Not anymore. Because I wasn't backing down. Not for her. Not for the HOA. Not for anyone. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of steel colliding with steel still echoed in my head like a battle cry. The gate held. The truck didn't. But I knew that wasn't the end of it. Karen didn't scream like that unless she was preparing to strike. So I turned on the porch light, brewed a pot of black coffee, and walked into the back office where I kept my old drafting table, the one Amanda and I used to pore over when we dreamed of building a cabin up north. I hadn't touched it in years. But now I flipped the top open and pulled out the faded folder marked Land Records, Garrett Parcell. Inside were the documents I received the day I closed on this land. Title deed, surveyor's notes, topographic overlays from the early 2000s. But what I really needed was older, much older. I slid the folder aside and reached for my laptop, opening the county assessor's GIS database. It was clunky, built in the early 2000s, and never modernized. But it had something most people didn't know existed: public scans of historical plat maps and utility overlays accessible if you knew where to click. Most people never bother. I wasn't most people. I used to work with this data. Back when I designed traffic corridors and rural floodway systems. Back when I still believed systems worked when paper trails meant something. I started with the 1965 maps. The lines were shaky, hand-drawn. But even then, I could see it: a narrow utility easement skirting the eastern edge of my property. Marked in pencil. Intended for temporary access during a waterline expansion that was scrapped in 1968. I moved to the 1984 revision. That same easement had been officially vacated by the city, clear as day. Signed, stamped, and scanned. The notation read, "Vacated by order of City Council Resolution 84-117. Access no longer required. Route deemed obsolete." I sat back and smiled. Then I clicked through the overlay toggle, comparing the vacated easement with current HOA construction plans publicly available thanks to their last zoning request. I loaded the Phase 3 schematic, rotated it slightly, and there it was. Their shortcut. It wasn't even close to legal access. They were cutting straight across vacated land on private property with no active right-of-way. The HOA never even applied for a new easement. They just assumed it was still valid. Or worse, hoped I wouldn't notice. I screenshotted everything. Then I called the county recorder's office first thing in the morning. Asked for a certified copy of Resolution 84-117 and requested a countersigned parcel map showing the removal of easement access from my land. The clerk, a woman named Evelyn with a kind, dry voice, asked why I needed it. I told her the truth. She sighed. "You're the third one this year calling about HOA overreach. Hang tight. I'll email you a copy and we'll get your official packet mailed by the end of day." She paused. "And Mr. Garrett, yes, you're doing the right thing." That meant more than she probably realized. By the time noon rolled around, I had a folder thick with printed maps, legal references, and historic resolution numbers, all notarized, all on official county letterhead. I made 4 color copies and slid them into binders labeled Evidence, Land Use Violation. 1 stayed with me. 1 went to the sheriff's office. 1 to the zoning board. And the 4th, that was for Karen. I delivered it myself. She wasn't expecting me. I walked straight into the HOA clubhouse during one of their Wednesday development sessions, where she sat flanked by 2 board members in matching blue polos embroidered with the Lakeside Oaks logo. Her expression when she saw me was like someone biting into a lemon they thought was a grape. "Mr. Garrett," she said flatly, "I come bearing gifts." I placed the binder on the table in front of her. She opened it, glanced at the first page, and her eyes immediately darted to the county seal. "That's right," I said. "Certified by the recorder's office this morning. The easement your trucks have been using terminated in 1984. And your failure to secure any current access permit is going to make your contractor very nervous once the city sees this." "You had no right to install that gate," she snapped. "I had every right. It's on my land. It's in compliance with local code, and I filed notice with the county 10 days ago." One of the board members leaned over to whisper something to her, his tone low and uncertain. I continued, "You've caused tens of thousands of dollars in property damage. I have photos, videos, time-stamped logs, and now legal documentation to prove this isn't just negligence, it's active trespass." Karen tried to regain control. "This is still a matter for civil mediation. We can resolve this amicably. Then stop sending trucks through my property. I'm not making that decision without a full board vote." "Fine," I said. "You have 24 hours. After that, I file for an emergency injunction and begin the process of recovering damages." I turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and one more thing, I've looped in a reporter. She's very interested in how the HOA is abusing unrecorded easements to expand a luxury phase." Karen paled. I walked out smiling. That night, I got a call from Brian. They rerouted the trucks. He was standing at the edge of his driveway, watching them come through the official entrance, this time one by one, like a reluctant funeral procession. No more shortcut. No more trespass. The gate remained closed, but I wasn't finished yet, because now I had something better than a steel barrier. I had proof, and I had leverage. It took me 3 full weekends to finish it. Not because I was slow, but because I was deliberate. Every bolt, every weld, every cut was measured twice, sometimes 3 times. I wasn't building a gate. I was building a line in the sand, a statement, a promise to myself that I would never again be walked over, dismissed, or treated like some dot on a zoning map. The frame alone weighed nearly 400 pounds. I used reinforced square tubing powder-coated to resist weather, but more importantly to reflect sunlight just enough that anyone approaching it would see it from 100 feet away. I wanted it to shine like a wall of no. On either side, I installed 6-foot concrete pillars, not decorative ones, but poured and rebarred set with anchor bolts that burrowed into the earth like tree roots. Each pillar had a recessed LED strip that lit up at night, casting an eerie glow that made the gate look like it belonged in front of a research lab or a military base, not some dusty shortcut through a suburban construction zone. I added an electric keypad on one side, hardwired to a backup battery I housed in a weatherproof casing I built from scratch. It didn't control the gate, not really. That was just for show. The real mechanism was a hydraulic lock embedded into the post itself. Even if they tried to pry it open or ram through it again, the gate wouldn't budge unless I wanted it to. But the real secret weapon was mounted 3 feet above ground, a 4K trail camera with night vision motion detection and a live feed that uploaded to a secure cloud server I controlled from my phone. I installed 2 more cameras along the tree line, one aimed at the rear approach and one from above mounted on a retractable pole. I bolted to the old irrigation shed. Together they gave me a near 360-degree view of the entire eastern stretch of my land. This wasn't just about stopping trucks anymore. This was about control. For the first time since Amanda died, I felt like I was reclaiming something. Not just the land, but myself. The man I used to be, the one who read soil composition reports like bedtime stories, and who could calculate the tensile strength of aluminum in his head. The gate became an obsession. I polished it, reinforced it. I even added a brass plate on the inside engraved with Amanda's favorite quote, "What you allow is what will continue." Duke and I stood back and looked at it the evening we finished. The sun was setting behind us, casting long golden shadows across the gravel. The gate shimmered like a shield. He sat beside me, tail wagging softly. "Looks good, doesn't it, boy?" He barked once, as if to say, "Damn right it does." The next morning I woke up early and put on my old work boots, the ones I hadn't worn since Amanda's funeral. They were scuffed, worn, but still solid. I walked out with a wrench in one hand and a mug of black coffee in the other. I tightened the final bolts, calibrated the motion sensor, and locked the control box. Then I waited. It didn't take long. By 9:42 a.m., the first truck arrived, a flatbed, carrying lumber wrapped in plastic and strapped down with sun-bleached tie-downs. The driver looked confused as he slowed to a crawl at the sight of the gate. He stepped out, hands on hips, and stared at it like it was an alien landing pod. I walked out from behind the shed, slow and steady. "Problem?" I asked. He looked at me, then at the gate. "I'm supposed to deliver this to Phase 3. They told me to come through here." "Not anymore." He scratched his head. "But this is the way we've been going all month." "Not your land," I said, and pointed to the sign. "And now it's closed." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something about the camera turning toward him must have changed his mind. He nodded and walked back to his truck. 10 minutes later, he turned around and drove off the way he came. Duke and I watched him go. An hour later, Karen herself arrived. She didn't come quietly. Her Lexus practically fishtailed into the dirt. She got out in heels on my soil and stomped toward the gate like she had the right to be furious. "What the hell is this?" she shouted. "Good morning to you too. You're obstructing a public access road." "No," I said, holding up the deed. "I'm protecting private property. Yours ends at the HOA sign 200 feet back. This," I gestured behind me, "is mine." She stormed up to the keypad and jabbed at it. "Don't bother," I said. "It's not connected to anything." She turned to me, nostrils flaring. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "Oh, I think I do," I said. "And now, so do the county, the sheriff, and the newspaper." Her face flushed. "You think this gate is going to stop us?" "No," I said calmly. "I know it will." I walked back toward the shed, leaving her standing there still stabbing the useless keypad like she could unlock it with anger alone. The cameras caught everything. That night, I posted the footage online, unlisted just for the lawyer, the county clerk, and the HOA board. The subject line of the email read, "Your access has been revoked." By the end of the week, HOA trucks were rerouted officially. I heard they had to pour a whole new temporary road across the west side of the neighborhood through their own greenbelt. The cost was staggering. The delays even worse. Karen stopped looking me in the eye when we passed at the gas station. And the gate, it stood. Strong, silent, unapologetic. Exactly like I intended. The morning it happened, I was already awake. Spring storms had rolled in overnight, rattling the windows and soaking the topsoil. I had brewed my first cup of coffee before the sun rose, watching lightning flicker silently in the distance. It wasn't raining anymore, but the air still smelled like ozone and damp pine. Duke sat by the door, ears perked. He always sensed when something was off. At 6:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. The alert from the motion camera lit up the screen. Gate sensor triggered. Vehicle detected. Eastbound. I tapped into the live feed. A cement truck, full-sized, likely 30 tons. It wasn't slowing down. The gate stood closed, exactly as it should be. Steel arms locked, sensors active, reinforced footings nestled deep in the wet earth. I could see condensation beating across the lens as the truck drew closer, headlights, dull and yellow against the gray sky. I ran out onto the porch and watched it through the trees, heart pounding. It was surreal. The truck wasn't just approaching, it was charging. The driver either didn't see the gate or didn't care. Then, boom. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard. A gut-level, bone-deep collision of mass and defiance. It echoed across the valley like a thunderclap, a roar of bent metal, grinding gears, and the unmistakable snap of something that wasn't the gate. I was already jogging across the yard, Duke bounding ahead of me, mud flying from his paws. As I approached the impact site, I saw smoke, or rather steam, rising from the crushed hood of the cement truck. Its front end had crumpled like paper. The grill was folded in on itself, the radiator hissing out white plumes. The windshield was spiderwebbed, but not shattered. Airbags deployed. The gate, still standing. Not even a dent. The steel braces held firm, unmoved, locked at the center. One of the support arms had a streak of white paint and a slight scratch. That was it. Everything else, the hydraulic cylinder, the concrete footings, the hinge mounts, remained untouched. My design had worked. Flawlessly. The driver stumbled out, dazed and wide-eyed, reeking of diesel and panic. "You okay?" I called out. He nodded, clutching his shoulder. Didn't see it in time. I kept my voice even. "You were doing over 30. How do you miss a 20-foot black steel gate with 4 signs and flashing lights?" He didn't answer. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had already called it in. Probably one of the nearby neighbors. A few of them had wandered out into their yards, robes and umbrellas in hand, watching the scene unfold like a Sunday matinee. A few minutes later, the sheriff's cruiser pulled up, followed by an ambulance and one of those boxy HOA trucks that always looked like mobile command centers. And stepping out of that SUV like a villain in heels was Karen Myers. Her hair was perfect, lipstick fresh, clipboard already in hand. She stormed across the gravel like she owned it. "What the hell happened here?" she barked. The deputy turned to me first. "You the property owner?" I nodded. "Yes, sir. Jeremy Garrett." "Gate yours?" "Yes, sir. Fully permitted. Installed last month." I filed notice with the county and HOA. "Everything's on record." He raised an eyebrow. "You got documentation?" I handed him a laminated packet I kept in the mailbox, mounted on the gate post. He flipped through it: permits, photos, engineer's notes, land title, and a copy of Resolution 84-117, vacating the old easement. He took his time reading. Meanwhile, Karen descended on the truck driver like a vulture. "I told you to wait until we had clearance. Did you not check the route?" He held up both hands. "GPS said go this way." I didn't know the gate was locked. "Karen," I called out, voice like gravel. "I emailed you. Twice. You even replied." She froze. Everyone turned to her. The deputy walked over, still holding the folder. "Ma'am, did your HOA instruct this driver to use Mr. Garrett's private property?" "We've used this route for months," she snapped. "It's always been the operational access point." "Not legally," I said calmly. "Not since 1984. He flipped to the page with the county seal. Karen's jaw clenched. The deputy turned to me. "Do you want to press charges?" I looked at the driver. He was just a kid, scared, wet, probably underpaid. "No," I said. "But I do want to file a formal report. Property damage, reckless driving, trespass." The deputy nodded. We'll log it. Karen's voice shot up. This is harassment. You've built a fortress in the middle of a community. It's my land, I said. And I built it because you refused to stop driving over it. She tried to argue, but the deputy raised his hand. Ma'am, you're going to need to take this up in civil court. As far as I can tell, Mr. Garrett is within his rights. If anything, the HOA may be liable for misdirection and property loss. Karen turned a shade paler. The tow truck came. It took nearly an hour to haul the cement truck out of the mud. The whole time, Duke sat by the gate, ears high-tail swishing like a silent sentry. I stood beside him, arms crossed, watching Karen pace in circles, muttering into her phone. As the cleanup wrapped, one of the neighbors wandered over Mary from 3 lots down. She looked at the gate, at the broken truck, at Karen, then at me. That gate's beautiful, she said. I smiled. Thank you. You know what it reminds me of, she asked. A drawbridge. Like in old castles. I chuckled. That's the idea. They built a kingdom. I built a wall. And for the first time since Amanda died, I felt something unexpected. Not just peace, but pride. The kind that only comes when you stand your ground and refuse to be erased. 2 days after the cement truck incident, I got a knock at my door at 7:13 a.m. Not the polite kind either. The kind of knock that hits your ribs before it hits your ears. The kind that comes with badges. I opened the door, slowly keeping Duke behind me. 2 sheriff's deputies stood there flanking a man in a tan blazer who carried himself like he had something to prove. Mr. Garrett, one of them asked. That's me. Do you have a few minutes to speak with us? I stepped outside, letting the storm door swing shut behind me. Duke barked once, low and muffled. The man in the blazer stepped forward. Detective Alan Morse, County Special Investigations Unit. We're here regarding a complaint filed by the Lakeside Oaks Homeowners Association. Specifically, Ms. Karen Myers. I raised an eyebrow. She's alleging unlawful obstruction of a community access route and installation of an unpermitted barrier with intent to endanger. I blinked. She really used the word endanger. He nodded, not quite meeting my eye. The deputy on the left cleared his throat. She claims the cement truck crash was caused by your gate and that you're refusing to cooperate with community standards. I exhaled slowly. You know that truck rammed a gate on my land, right? The gate I legally built. That's what we're here to confirm, Detective Morse said, flipping open a notebook. Mind if we take a look? I nodded toward the driveway. Be my guest. I've got documentation ready. We walked together, boots crunching across gravel still damp from last night's rain. The gate stood there pristine and locked, its matte black surface reflecting the first rays of sun. This is the gate in question, the detective asked. Yes, installed last month. Notified the county. Permitted. Compliant with Code 48.7 Private Agricultural Barrier Installations. I pulled a laminated packet from the lockbox beside the gate. Inside permits engineering schematics, land surveys. And most importantly, a notarized copy of Resolution 84017. The same one I had handed to the HOA board. The detective scanned the first few pages, then passed it to the deputy, who took a photo of each one with his department-issued phone. She say anything about the easement status, the deputy asked. I laughed once. She still thinks this is 1975. We stood in silence for a moment. Then I said, you want to see the footage? Footage. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. Within seconds, the cement truck's impact played in sharp, clear 4K. The steam from the engine, the lack of brake lights, the exact timestamp, and Karen's SUV arriving, her screaming face recorded from 2 angles. The detective watched in silence. When it ended, he looked at me, eyebrows raised. May I forward this to our records unit? Be my guest. He tapped his phone against mine. AirDrop accepted. Then, as he turned away from the gate, he asked almost casually, what made you decide to build it in the first place? I looked at him for a beat. Then I said, because I spent 6 months asking nicely. And because the HOA spent 6 months pretending I didn't exist. He nodded like he understood more than he was allowed to say. They left soon after. No citations, no warnings, just a quiet assurance that they'd be closing their report within the week. But Karen wasn't done. At exactly 3:15 that afternoon, I received a certified envelope. Inside, a cease and desist letter from Dunstan, Blake & Rios, same law firm. Accusations of reckless endangerment, malicious obstruction, and interference with community development interests. I read it twice, then filed it in my growing folder. Operation Gatekeeper, Phase 2. That night, I made a phone call I'd been saving. Amanda had a cousin named Lydia, a real estate attorney turned municipal code enforcer. We hadn't spoken since Amanda's funeral, but I figured this was as good a time as any. She picked up on the second ring. Jeremy. Hi, Lyd. You still good at making HOA boards regret their life choices? She laughed. Absolutely. What happened? I've got a Karen problem, with a gate and a truck and now lawyers. Email me everything. I sent her the full packet maps footage, legal filings, permit scans, and the HOA's latest threat. By midnight, I had a reply. This is textbook overreach. You're within your rights. They're bluffing. I'm filing a counter notice tomorrow morning. Let's play. The next day, she hit them like a freight train. Karen and the board received a certified notice of civil liability with demands for restitution for property damage, emotional distress, defamation, and harassment. Lydia included case law precedent and a warning that if they pushed any further discovery, would begin including all internal emails between the board and the contractor. I didn't hear a word from Karen for 3 days. Then came the email. Mr. Garrett, the board has voted to discontinue all further correspondence on this matter and will be rerouting all traffic through Phase 2's official access road as of this week. We appreciate your patience and hope to avoid further misunderstandings. Best regards, Karen Myers, HOA President. No apology, no acknowledgement of fault. But in HOA speak, that was as close to surrender as I was going to get. I printed the email, taped it to the back of the gate. Then, as the sun set over my muddy field, I sat on the porch with Duke and poured myself a quiet drink. No victory parade, no champagne. Just stillness, just space, just peace. And a gate that stood stronger than any apology ever could. The summons came in a thick white envelope with the county seal embossed at the top, and my name printed in bold capital letters just beneath the words. Notice of public hearing, zoning and access, dispute Garrett versus Lakeside Oaks HOA. I held it in my hands longer than I needed to. Not because I was surprised I wasn't. Karen's silence was never surrender. It was a coil winding tighter, waiting to strike where she thought I was weakest. What surprised me was the hearing itself. She'd taken it to the zoning commission hoping to twist the narrative in front of an audience she believed she could control. She had no idea she'd walked into my house. I had worked with this commission for years, not as a homeowner, but as a civil engineer. I knew their language. I knew their process. I knew exactly how to dismantle the flimsy scaffolding Karen had built around her lie. Still, I did everything by the book. I called Lydia. We've got a date, I said. What's the panel, she asked. 3 city commissioners, 2 alternates, 1 chair. She clicked her tongue. This is good. This is very good. They're policy people, not HOA loyalists. And they hate code manipulation. She laughed. Then let's give them a show. We spent the next 2 weeks compiling the master file. By the time we were done, it was a binder 5 inches thick, color-tabbed, bookmarked, and cross-referenced like a federal case. Lydia called it the hammer. I called it closure. The hearing was scheduled for 10:00 a.m. on a rainy Thursday. I wore a gray suit that still smelled faintly like the cedar closet where Amanda used to keep it pressed. Lydia met me on the courthouse steps, umbrella in one hand, a briefcase in the other. You ready to bury them? She asked. Been ready for months. Inside the hearing room was sterile, but formal folding chairs for the public, a long dais, where the 5 commission members sat, and a microphone set at a height clearly designed to make you uncomfortable. Karen sat at the table across from ours, flanked by 2 attorneys from Dunstan, Blake, and Rios, and a third man I assumed was their land use consultant. She didn't look at me. Good. The chairwoman, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s named Ruth Navarro, opened the proceedings by reading the complaint into public record. The HOA alleges that Mr. Jeremy Garrett has unlawfully obstructed what they claim is a historic utility easement with a barrier that impedes necessary construction access and requests the commission to declare the gate in violation of community development codes and compel its removal. Lydia stood. Madam Chair, we request that the term historic utility easement be struck from the record as said easement was officially vacated by municipal resolution in 1984 and we have documentation. She handed over a printed exhibit packet. Ruth flipped through the pages. Her eyebrows went up when she saw the county seal and handwritten surveyor's notes. Duly noted, she said. One of the HOA's attorneys stood. Regardless of the outdated easement, the HOA contends that there is a customary right of access based on repeated use over a long period. Ruth interrupted. Counselor, customary use does not override recorded title. Are you suggesting the HOA never sought a formal easement? He shifted in place. It was assumed. Lydia leaned over and whispered in my ear, "That's a coffin nail." We took our turn next. Lydia presented video evidence, trucks barreling through my land GPS overlays, timestamps, warning signs, and the now infamous cement truck crash. Then came the paper trail. She showed. And the certified termination of the easement. The notarized deed with boundary overlays. The emails from the HOA board acknowledging my complaints, but refusing to act. And finally, the cease and desist letter I received, proof that they knew I was asserting my rights and tried to intimidate me anyway. The commissioner at the far right, an older gentleman with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. "Let me get this straight," he said, peering over the frames. "You told them to stop, and instead of stopping, they sued you." I nodded. "They sent trucks through my property for months." I asked nicely. "I posted signs. I installed cameras. When they ignored all of that, I built a legal, permitted gate." Their response was to accuse me of obstruction. Commissioner Navarro closed the folder in front of her. "Do you have anything else to add, Mr. Garrett?" I hesitated, then I stood. "I moved here after my wife passed away. This land is all I have left of her. The garden, the porch, the stillness. It's not just property. It's sacred ground, and it's mine. I don't care if the HOA wants to finish their luxury phase or sell million-dollar homes. But they don't get to do it at the expense of someone who never joined their association, never signed their covenants, and never gave them permission to use my life as a shortcut." I sat down. Silence. Karen's face was blank, but her hands were white-knuckled beneath the table. Ruth tapped her pen on the desk. "The commission will now deliberate." They stepped into the adjacent room, and the rest of us waited in the stale air. 15 minutes later, they returned. Navarro cleared her throat. "The commission finds that the Lakeside Oaks Homeowners Association failed to secure legal access through Mr. Garrett's property and acted in disregard of clearly marked boundaries. We further find that Mr. Garrett's gate was installed within the scope of his rights as a private landowner and is not in violation of any zoning or community development codes. Therefore, the HOA's complaint is denied in full." Lydia squeezed my shoulder. Karen sat frozen. One of her attorneys muttered something under his breath, and the consultant looked like he was trying to disappear. Then Navarro looked directly at Karen. "And Ms. Myers," she said, "I'd advise your board to review their approach to community engagement before someone else files suit for harassment." Karen opened her mouth, closed it. I didn't say a word as we left the building. Outside, the rain had stopped. Lydia and I stood at the edge of the steps, breathing in the clean, cool air. She turned to me. "Now what?" I smiled, small and tired, but real. "Now I go home. I lock my gate. I finish planting the tomatoes. I drove home from the courthouse with the windows down." The air was crisp in that way it gets after a rainstorm, fresh, unfiltered, the kind that makes you feel like the world's been washed clean. Duke had his head halfway out the passenger side window, tongue flapping, eyes closed. I hadn't seen him that relaxed in weeks. Neither of us had much to say, but we didn't need to. I pulled into the gravel drive and slowed to a stop in front of the gate. My gate. It stood like a monument now. No longer just a barrier or a boundary or even a warning, it was a symbol of all the things I'd lost and all the things I'd reclaimed. I stepped out, boots crunching against the stones, and walked up to the keypad. The metal still felt cool under my fingers, but there was something warmer beneath it now. Resolve, maybe. Or maybe peace. I punched in the code and listened to the soft whir as the lock disengaged. The gate swung open like it was welcoming me back home. Duke trotted ahead, tail wagging, as we made our way up the path past the shed, the bent trellis, the still muddied ruts from a war already over. I'd fix them eventually. But not today. Today I just wanted to be still. I grabbed a folding chair from the porch, set it in the shade beside Amanda's garden, and poured myself a glass of sweet tea. It was the first time in months that the wind didn't carry the rumble of construction engines. No trucks, no dust, no strangers invading my space. Only the soft rustle of leaves and the rhythmic creak of my wind chime swaying in the breeze. I looked at the garden. The Cherokee purple seedlings had started to poke through the soil again, fragile but determined. The last packet Amanda had saved was now buried in fresh compost, and I'd surrounded the bed with a new fence. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to protect it. Not from trucks anymore. From the memory of being powerless. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. It was a text from Lydia. "They're not appealing. Your file scared the hell out of them. HOA lawyer quit 2 days ago." I let out a short breath. Not a laugh, not a sigh. Just something in between. I texted back, "Tell them the gate says hi." She sent a smiley face emoji. Professional to the end. The next day, I took down the camera mounted on the shed pole. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I didn't care anymore. They could drive circles around their own clubhouse for all I cared as long as they stayed on their side of the line. And they did. A week passed, then 2. No more trucks, no more letters, no more surprise visits. Karen had vanished from public sight. Word around the neighborhood was that she had stepped down from the HOA board, citing health reasons. Brian said he saw her house up for sale. I never asked where she went. Truth is, I didn't care, because I hadn't fought her just to win. I'd fought so that people like her people who think power gives them permission would think twice before rolling over someone just because they thought they could. And for the first time in a long, long time, I slept with the windows open. One morning, about a month later, I was outside weeding the rows when Mary from down the street showed up holding a plate of lemon bars. She said they were still warm. "I figured it's time someone said thank you," she said. "For what?" "For showing us we don't have to take it." I looked at her confused. She gestured toward the fence line, toward the gate. "You stood up when the rest of us just rolled over. They sent you threats. You sent them truth. You gave a lot of us our voices back." I smiled and took the plate, the sugar melting against my fingers. "Well, I said lemon bars go a long way too." We stood there in the sun for a while, not talking, just listening to the world be quiet. Later that afternoon, I installed a small wooden sign just to the right of the gate beneath the camera housing and beside the motion light. It didn't say keep out, didn't say private property, or no trespassing, or even smile, you're on camera. It just said, "This land is loved. Walk carefully." Not for the HOA, not for the lawyers, for Amanda, for me. Because while they tried to crush what I built, they only sharpened what I became. I was never meant to be a fighter. But they taught me what it meant to hold the line. And I learned that sometimes the quietest men build the strongest walls, not to keep the world out, but to protect what matters within. My gate still stands, and now so do I.